Hello and welcome to a new video in the interesting approaches or approach tutorial series. Today we are flying into Aspen, Colorado, which is very challenging mountain airport. We are actually doing it in nice weather today because the scenery is just stunning and we want to see the landscape and the mountains. But the approach we are flying is actually a very challenging instrument approach. I'm talking about the Localizer DME runway 15 AR approach into Aspen, which you will actually not find if you look at the FAA publications for that airport. Here on airnav.com, you find all the instrument procedures that are published by the FAA. You see there's an RNAV Foxtrot approach, a LOC-DME Echo approach, VOR DME Charlie approach, and the Roaring Fork Visual approach, of course. And you will not find the LOC-DME 15 approach. The LOC-DME 15 approach is not public. It is special authorization required. It is an actual approach that is approved by the FAA. There are Jeppesen charts for it, but it is special authorization required, so only certain operators get this approach. Only certain operators are authorized to fly this approach, and only those operators get the charts for it. This is why you will not find the LOC-DME 15 charts online, but through Googling you can find a slightly outdated chart. I will put a link in the video description. I'm actually surprised by the fact that the LOC-DME 15 authorization required approach is in the Navigraph data. So if you have X-Plane, you can just load this approach from the Jeppesen data as if you were an authorized operator, which is interesting. I don't know why Navigraph does this. If they just told Jeppesen, hey, give us all the special authorization stuff, very interesting. But if you are just a regular guy in a 172 and you are flying to Aspen and you try to load this approach into your 430 or into your G1000 or whatever, it will not show up. So the approaches you will be able to fly is a VOR DME approach, a LOC-DME approach, and an RNAV overlay that just mirrors the VOR approach. It's an overlay of the VOR approach. So the LOC-DME Echo approach is actually quite close to the LOC-DME 15 approach in that it uses the same localizer and also uses the same mist approach, but the step-down altitudes are different and the minimum is different. The circling minimum of the LOC-DME Echo approach is 9,840. Note that it's a circling minimum. It's not a straight-in runway 15 minimum because the minimum is so high over the airfield that you cannot get from the missed approach point at minimum descent altitude down to the threshold of the runway with a normal descent gradient. It's not possible. That's why it is considered a circling approach, even though the localizer goes straight into the runway. So the difference with the LOC-DME 15 approach, note that it is called 15 and not Echo, is that the minimum is actually low enough that it can have straight-in minima. The straight-in minimum is 8,780, but it requires extremely steep gradient, 4.55 degrees descent gradient. So the key to flying that approach is going to be getting slow, having drag, getting the flaps out, getting the gear out early, and get that descent in without getting too fast. All right, let's do it. Now I switch back to X-Plane. As you can see here, I have pulled up the chart of the this very special chart that is not public, not for public use. I will put a link to it in the video description so you can try it and X-Plane. And I'm actually not going to load the approach into the G1000, even though I could. I'm just going to fly green needles raw data so you see how it is done, partly because the published data by Navigraph is a little newer than the chart that I found online, and I have not been able to locate a chart online that corresponds to the data that is actually in X-Plane right now. So in order to not get confused by have the chart disagree with the with the GPS. We're just going to pretend it's, I don't know, a couple of years ago, the chart is current, and we're going to fly raw data according to the chart. One thing you will notice on the chart and on the FAA charts as well, let me switch back for a second, you see that it says the localizer back course that is being used for the missed approach. It says that the back course localizer is forward sensing, and if you pay very close attention to the chart, you will see that the shaded area of the localizer is actually on the wrong side, and that is pretty unique. I think it's the only localizer in the world that is actually mounted backwards, that is actually sending the signals the wrong way on the wrong side. And yeah, when we fly the missed approach, we will see how that works. All right, so right now we're just straight into the Red Table VOR. The autopilot is in heading mode. We're just flying here by the bearing pointer. I'm just following the bearing pointer on the HSI here. So that just gets me straight to the Red Table VOR. I have set the outbound a course of 206 because this is the radial we're going to fly outbound of the Red Table VOR. And as soon as we cross Red Table VOR, we will descend down to 12,200. And again, of course, tracking the VOR outbound. And as you can see, I'm slowing down already. As I told you, we want to get the speed down in order for the descent to work. What I will do now is I will lead the turn a little bit, and I will actually turn on the autopilot, arm the VOR capture of the autopilot, and what that will do is as soon as the needle flips over and we pass the Red Table VOR, the autopilot should lock on to the outbound radial and track it. And as soon as that is happening, I will descend down to 12,200. So you can see the needle is flipping. We're passing the VOR. And we'll descend down to 12.2. Level change, throttle back to idle. And the VOR needle should move in now. There you go. Autopilot captures it, and the autopilot will track it outbound now. And as you can see on nav 2, I have tuned the Alpha Zero Echo, India Alpha Zero Echo, localizer. And we have the DME readout there. Note that this is not the actual DME readout. This is a GPS-derived distance, which we can use when flying under FAA rules. If we were flying an approach in Europe, we would have to bring up the separate DME window and go by that distance. But as we're flying here under simulated FAA rules, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So we have quite some altitude to lose, and I'm going to actually drop the gear now, give us some extra drag so that we lose the altitude. And I'm going to bring up the, I'm going to switch the source now to bring up the localizer that we're going to track inbound in a second. The localizer should begin to move any second. And as soon as we are tracking it inbound, we will check the DME distance and then drop down to 11,000. Here comes the localizer. The DME distance right now should be 11.2, precisely correct. After 11.2, we can drop down to 11,000. I'm also going to drop the flaps just to give me a little bit steeper descent grade. And our next check altitude is going to be 11,000 at 8.5 DME. So we are waiting for the 8.5 DME indication here, and there we want to be at 11,000 feet. Okay, the autopilot is tracking the localizer very nicely. If you look out there in the distance, you can actually see the airport. And of course, you have to imagine we would be doing that in the soup. But the mountain scenery is just too nice to be flying the the approach completely in the soup for the purpose of a video. Of course, if you want to give yourself some challenge and refly this approach in X-plane, set the weather down to, I don't know, a non-precision approach, I guess, and break out at the last second. All right, half a mile to go. We are at 11,000. The next altitude is going to be 10,300 at 8.5 DME. The descent can begin at 8.5, which is right now. And the next DME is 7.2. After 7.2 DME, we can descend down to 9,800 feet. So this is going to go very quick now. And if you're not, get your speed down early, and that's why I dropped the gear, dropped the flaps already. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make that descent gradient. So 7.2 and 10,300, that looks quite good. The next altitude is 9,800 until 6.1 DME. 9.8 and continue descent. Yep. 6.1 DME is the next checkpoint. And after that, we can drop down to the minimum of 8,780. So for all intents and purposes, I'm calling that 8,800. So 6.1 DME is what we're waiting for. 6.2. 6.1. Okay, level change down to 8.8. So an 8.8 is the MDA, and our missed approach point is at 3.9 DME. 3.9 DME. And for purposes of the missed approach, I will put the outbound localizer here in nav1. So 3.9 DME is the missed approach point. There comes the minimum descent altitude. Like about half a mile to go. I have to add some power here. Okay, so now we are at MDA. And if we were not seeing the runway right now, we could continue until the missed approach. 3.9, here it is. So I'm going to start the missed approach procedure. So power, gear up, positive rate. And I'm going to turn right, bring the flaps in. And I'm going to switch over to the LOC-1 localizer, and we're going to climb to 14,000. So I'm going to put it in level change again, exactly. All right, and what we are doing now is we want to capture 303 degrees outbound on the Papa Kilo November localizer. And as you can see, we are headed away from the localizer station, so we are flying outbound, back course away from it. But we have set the HSI in the direction we are going, not in the direction towards the localizer. So we are flying it as if we were flying a front course. So, and the reason for that is, as I pointed out on the chart, the localizer is installed backwards. The back course is forward sensing because they intentionally installed it backwards. The reason for that is, of course, this localizer is never used inbound. The only purpose of that localizer is to fly it outbound on the missed approach. So no one will ever be using the localizer front course normal sensing. So they intentionally put it the wrong way around, to have the back course normal sensing. And what happened here right now, you can see the autopilot is capturing the localizer as if it was flying inbound to it. And actually what you saw right now, the GFC 700 capturing that is something that actually does not work in the real world with most G1000s, because there's a software bug in the GFC 700 that expects the localizer to work the right way around, and then the autopilot never captures it because the localizer comes in from the wrong side. The autopilot expects the localizer to come in from the other side, so when the needle moves in opposite to the direction the autopilot expects, the autopilot will fly right through the localizer and never capture it. And this not only is a problem on this special authorization required super special approach, but it is also a problem on the published localizer approach, because the missed approaches of those two procedures are the same. So, and people flying into Aspen noticed that and began writing to Garmin and told them, hey, your autopilot blows right through the localizer, it doesn't work. So a couple of years ago, Garmin actually made an update for the GFC 700 to fix that problem. But the problem with software updates for real-world avionics is that they don't reach the normal run-of-the-mill airplane. If you're an operator with a certain fleet of aircraft with a certain number, with a certain installed base of G1000s, then you will and Aspen is one of your destinations that you fly into regularly, then you will probably decide to upgrade your fleet. You talk to your avionics shop, you pay them a lot of money, you ground your fleet for a while and have the software update installed so that the GFC 700 actually captures this localizer. But the vast majority of G1000 aircraft out there, they never see any kind of software update once they are out of the factory. They are basically like Android phones in that respect. So if you charter or rent the run-of-the-mill 172 with a G1000, I guarantee you, if you fly to Aspen, you will hit this bug, because your run-of-the-mill 172 will not have had the Garmin software update installed to make this localizer work. So actually, I was a little bit torn how I should program it in X-Plane, whether I should leave the bug in X-Plane to make it realistic and not work. But I kind of thought that was lame and I could do better. So yeah, we actually put it in X-Plane so that it works better than it does for most real-world aircraft. All right, to finish off the missed approach, what we need to do is we need to put the Red Table VOR into nav2 here, and we are waiting for the 244 radial, which is right here. Let me dial that and mark that with the heading box so we see it. So as we are flying the localizer outbound, basically what we're waiting for is to put the 244 radial here and then track that outbound to a point named, what was the missed approach point again? Gleno, exactly, out to the Gleno point. So basically, yeah, waiting on the radial here, and we've reached our 14,000 feet altitude already. Well, Cirrusjet climbs quite well. And let's see, yeah, we have about like 10 degrees or so to go. And then we're just going to track the course outbound. So about 4 degrees or so to go. Switch in heading mode. Switch over to VOR2. Set 244. That's the course we want to track. put the autopilot in VOR mode, and it will track the 244 radial outbound. And that should take us to Gleno. And Gleno is actually identified by the 134 radial from Echo Kilo Romeo, which is on 115.2. So we can put that up here. 115.2. There you go. So we are waiting on the 134 radial, which is right there. Let's mark it with the heading bug. And so Gleno will be when we are on this radial outbound, when this bearing pointer will hit the heading bug here, then we are at the Gleno intersection. And there we could initiate the missed approach holding, but I guess you all know how to fly a holding, so I don't need to repeat that here. So we are very close to crossing the radial here. And if you look over here at the map, here's Gleno. So this is exactly the point we're looking for. We can identify it with this crossing radial right here. If the needle here points is exactly in line with the heading bug that I put at 134. We are over Gleno. Yeah, precisely nailed that. So as you can see, it's perfectly possible to hit an intersection even though we have not loaded anything into the GPS. All right, for a little critique, let's look at the map. What we did, yeah, we came in here 266 outbound from Red Table. Then what I did is I switched the CDI and put the autopilot into localizer capture mode while we were kind of supposed to still follow the radial until the localizer really moved into the center. So this is actually not very good. I should have stayed on this radial outbound a little longer. This turn should have been a little sharper and not kind of this soft, smushy intercept here. I guess for a fast flying aircraft it would look like that, but if we have the speed under control, this turn should be a little sharper. Again, I should have probably put the autopilot in heading mode, then switched the CDI and then armed the localizer again, and that would have done that a little better. And here you can see actually you can see the localizer that is pointed this way. The X-plane map paints the front course, and of course in reality there is no front course because there's just a mountain here. So X-plane map paints it where the front course would be if you cared for it. So what you have to do is you have to kind of imagine the back course, the front sensing back course of the localizer going out in this direction, and this is of course exactly how we flew outbound here. And yeah, another thing I could have done better, I guess, is at this point I just turned off the autopilot and hand flew it until here when I rearmed it to intercept the localizer. In a real airplane, I probably would not have done that. In the real airplane, I would have pushed the go around button here and just hand flew it until I was established on the localizer, and then probably put it into heading mode, because again, if I'm flying a real airplane, I cannot count on the software being up to date, which probably means the autopilot cannot track this localizer. So in a real airplane, what you probably want to do is press the go around button here, hand fly it until about here, and then put it into heading mode and just observe where the localizer is going. All right, this is, I think, the second video in my don't know how many part series of challenging approaches. The first, of course, being the Martin State approach. I'll put a link to that into the description as well. And yeah, I encourage you to try out Aspen yourself in X-Plane.